Hi, and welcome to another Scientology Outside of the Church podcast, weekend edition. At least when we recorded this, maybe not when you're hearing it. This is season 11, episode 19. And this one is going to be on criticism or truth. It might be a difficult listen for some people. But it's an interesting topic because how much criticism is criticism and how much is truth. So I'm here with Quentin Stroud. Arthur will be joining us as soon as he can get logged into Zoom to get on from Malaysia, not far from Quentin. Quentin, how are you?
Hey, I'm doing fantastic. This is going to be a really interesting conversation.
I'm sort of like, "Eh,
Well,
okay. And I'm the one that
because,
came up with
because
the concept.
yeah, because I think oftentimes, I guess it's natural to when you hear something that seems to be antithetical to who you are or what's going on with you or what you got going on or what you're wearing or whatever, it's often immediately heard as critical or criticism. And I can get that. Like I can get why if somebody says something that you don't like about yourself, that could feel like you're criticizing me, right? But per LRH, we need to look at that a little bit deeper.
The sword of the situation is it criticism or is it truth? Because LRH says in Science of Survival, it's not criticism if it's true.
Mm.
Now, the criticizer thinks, well, what I'm saying is true. Maybe they're being critical. The receiver might take it as criticism more often than they would truth. So how
Mhm.
does a person navigate that both as the emitter and the receiver, cause distance effect with intention, attention, duplication, understanding. And that's basically the idea of the podcast is
Right.
how do we do this? How does a person do this? And how do they, are they justifying? Are they trying to minimize, that sort of thing too?
Well, I'll say this from an OT perspective. I will say that when you're operating in a very high spiritual band, you know, I think that a lot of stuff that is often meant to be critical or meant to be invalidating or harmful can sometimes just kind of roll off your back. You know, it's almost like you become a little bit impervious to the little boom, 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 boom bullets that people want to shoot at you. And I think that that's amazing when that happens, right? When it happens that, you know what, I see, I hear your viewpoint. I got that you think that that's true, whatever case it be, and it doesn't really phase you. Um, and at the same time, you know, being so aware of self, knowing who you are, and somebody to say something that's against that, that can also be very jarring. So it's a bit of a, damned if you do, damned if you don't kind of scenario because you're OT, you're doing well, you're hitting a high level, and it can sometimes bounce off of you, or it can be like, wait a minute, you don't know who I really am, you know.
Right. And you also have to take into consideration, and this is something that it is an extremely fine line itself prior to this, that and we've mentioned this in a few other episodes, where a person doesn't get ARC broken, which is an upset. That's what an ARC break. It's a break in affinity, reality, communication, or understanding. They don't get upset if they don't have a missed withhold, which is something they've withheld that is a contra survival act. Okay. And a contra survival act is something you've received or you've done. You receive it as a motivator, it motivates you to commit another harmful act. if you've already committed an overt. But if you haven't committed an overt, you don't have a withhold. Therefore, the withhold can't be missed. Therefore, you won't be ARC broken per
You
LRH.
won't feel it.
You
Yeah.
won't feel it.
You can't become the effect of it.
Right. So then if and I've even had, and I was stupefied when this person said this to me, who was on the OT levels. I was stupefied in a way because I couldn't wrap my head around what they said. And they said, I don't get ARC broken anymore because I'm an OT. I thought, well, hey, kudos to you. If you are that clean of an individual, um, the physical universe tends to present catch 22s a lot, and you're damned if you do, damned if you don't. And I guess it's possible for somebody to be in that position and not have, to have that clean of a heart. But I just thought, well, is that really true, that you're able to do that, and you don't receive anything that ARC breaks you at all, and
Well,
therefore
I
you
mean,
can't be evaluated for it at all and take it personal?
yeah. I'm from Alabama. For those of you who have been listening to the podcast, y'all know I'm from Alabama, and we have all these colloquial Southern sayings,
Yeah.
and my mama used to always say, "A hurt dog a holler,
Hmm.
a hurt dog a holler." And so, if somebody says something to you and you feel like you need to holler back, strike back, force your way back, or fight back, or whatever the case may be, it must have been that pricked you somehow. It must have been that hit on something, right? It hit
Right.
somewhere. And so taking those moments to kind of be self-reflective and kind of say, wait a minute, why did that get to me so? Growing up in the South, and this is just my own little anecdotal thing, but growing up in the South, dealing with racism, there was a lot of times when being called certain expletives and certain words happened, right?
Hmm.
Um, Knowing who I was, even as a young boy, knowing who I was and knowing that where I was operating in myself, it didn't hit me like that. My
Right.
brother, on the other hand, my brother would get really pissed off, right? He would get really, really upset, if some point wanted to pull a gun and do all this other stuff, whatever. And I'm like, why are you doing all that? I
Hmm.
like, so I
Right.
I just think it really does hit people differently depending on who they are, where they are in their journey.
Right. And to put in context what I was saying about this particular individual that said that, they don't get ARC broken anymore because they're an OT, the conversation was very defensive. That's why I was stupefied. So, and like you say with your brother, it okay, so you're not ARC broken. Okay. But and there wasn't any criticism going on there, but it just made me think, okay, so if somebody is telling you the truth and you take it as criticism, that is an ARC break. And LRH says when you fly, when you well fly, when you do, I'll skip that term for now. It's an
Hmm.
fly is FN, a floating needle. You're getting the needle to float, therefore it's flying. When you fly in rudiments, as an auditor in session, he said 90% of the time what you're going to be handling is ARC breaks. 90%.
Hmm.
It's in the technical volume. So
Hmm.
if a person is impervious because they don't have any missed withholds and somebody criticizes them, they're are they telling the truth or are they criticizing them if the person doesn't take it personal? No, they're not. Like you said, a hurt dog will holler. So if
Hmm.
if you're not hurting, is it the truth or is it criticism? Because the only thing that isn't criticism is truth,
Right,
which is a,
right.
a funny a funny spin on this.
Well, and beautifully so, per what you just said, that 90% of when you're flying rudiments, which I think is so amazing that LRH refers to them as rudiments, which is like the basic
The
of
basic.
the things that you're dealing with, right? Like it's like before we get anything accomplished, before we go any deeper, let's fly these rudiments. Let's pull on these things and make sure we pull out everything that needs to be put out before we try to go into the deep stuff, right? And so
Mhm.
um I think it's really important that he says that 90% of what you're going to hit is ARC breaks. But at the same time, a person doesn't get ARC broken unless there's some what? Missed withholds, right? So if
Mhm.
90% of what you hit is ARC breaks, then that also means that there's some missed withholds back there as well that have led to
Mhm.
the ARC breaks that one is hitting, you know?
Right.
And so I think it's really, really interesting that when you deal with family, and I'm speaking in a more practical sense, when we deal with family, when we deal with lovers, when we deal with loved ones, when we deal with bosses and people that work in school and da da da, and somebody tries to say something to you that's critical or that feels like it's criticism, if it hits, it's okay to stop and say, "Oh, why did that affect me so? What's going on in here? What's going on with me that affect me so?" And take a moment to do a self check. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
and,
Yeah.
and not to spin and kind of interiorize in the matter, but to really just almost kind of be exterior to the incident, to the moment, and be like, let me take an exterior viewpoint of this. Let me take a look. And what's interesting about that is you're gonna reveal for yourself, not anybody else's evaluation of you, but you're gonna reveal for yourself maybe there was some truth there. And if it was, it'll as is. It'll vanish. It'll disappear. It'll be like, oh, okay, well, hey, won't do that
Right.
anymore.
Right. And the funny thing is, and this wasn't necessarily the intended direction that I was headed in this, but it's an interesting point that even if somebody is correct in their assessment of said criticism, even if they're correct, if you don't have anything on it, you don't have an overt that's being missed as a missed withhold, and or well, it's a withhold first. A withhold, the miss withhold are two things. Somebody can have a withhold and it hasn't been missed, which is pretty rare, but it can be. But the important thing is the miss withhold, because when a person misses your withhold, the side effect is you blow up. What? I can't believe you said that. How could you say that about me? Okay. So the result is one of two things. Is they blow up. How could you say that about me? Okay. So they know, or they should know, with this podcast, with this tech, they are ARC breaking right there when they're blowing up, because now somebody has touched on something as a
Mm-hmm.
miss
Yep.
withhold, and they're wondering, do they really know? Okay, bing, we have a pimple on the skin of your case. We need to pop it. and
Boy, oh
and
boy.
pull that festering overt out. However, it isn't criticism if it's true. So you've got the receiver and you've got the omitter, the originator of this. So in looking at something, and this is another fine line to this, is the two LRH's two rules to happy living. Only cause those effects others can easily have. On the flip side, be willing to experience anything.
Be able to
That's a
experience anything. That's right.
that's a
That's
tall order. That's a
I
tall
love it.
order. How are you able to experience anything? A hot poker to the side. Are you willing to
Mm-hmm.
experience that? I mean, that's how it feels when somebody criticizes you. I mean, it's an analogy, but it is
Yeah, it's
how
a
it
stab.
seems. Yeah, it's a stab. And if it's a stab, you've got something you need to address yourself. Now the question is, will you?
Mm-hmm. And it's interesting because we almost say it like without Scientology and all that stuff like that, without Scientology's language, we almost say it naturally. Oh, I'm just poking fun. I'm just poking fun at you. He was picking on me. Ooh, that's smarts. Whatever case it be. Like there's so many different ways that we almost naturally talk about how criticism feels to the being, that it feels like a stab, it feels like a poke, it feels like you're trying to penetrate me, in a
Right.
negative way. And that's not okay. And so, no, let me be clear. We're not saying that just because it's true, one deserves to be criticized or anything like that, right? What it's
Right.
saying is that it's not criticism if it's true. It's not criticism if it's true. It
Mhm.
could be an observation. It could be even an evaluation, a correct evaluation, perhaps, right? It could be an evaluation. And from that, if one is sane enough and willing to take a look, they can actually use that information to make some changes, make some decisions or whatever, and start to move forward with it. You know, I will say that when we deal with criticism, obviously there is a natural defensiveness. I think you used that word earlier. There's a natural defensiveness that can come along with it. Um, because there's some things that just should not be, right? There's some things that just should not be said. There's certain things that just should not be poked at, if you will. And
Right.
so, there's a natural defensiveness that comes up, but you can also come at it from a different perspective too.
Yeah. Well, I went to Finn right before we started the podcast on ao-gp.org, our main website, and I asked it. I wanted to get the reference on it, and what it came up with is based on the technical materials, the concept you're asking about relates to the distinction between criticism and factual observation. In the Dianetics and Scientology dictionary, it states that criticism, quote, criticism, when not borne out in fact, is only an effort to reduce the size of the target of the overt. And this goes back to the State of Man Congresses in 1960, where Why People Don't Like You is the name of the lecture. He says the reason why people who have committed overts against someone criticize in order to lessen the target of whom they've committed an overt or contra survival act to, because it's justified in the fact that if I minimize them, well, it's not that big of a deal because they're trash anyway, or whatever. I mean, but like you were saying, is when if you don't have anything on it, and what's your, and I'm sorry to bring this into a, a Scientological uh, context and conversation, but it's true. I'm a Cancer. You're a
Pisces.
Pisces,
Mhm.
and you you're very much you just don't take anything personal.
Pisces are more spiritual. I look at things from a very spiritual lens, and versus an emotional one. And while cancers can sometimes be more emotional,
Right.
and I think it's interesting to state that, because it is, like you said, it's it's how the person, what is the intention of your criticism, right? Are you
Right.
trying to lessen me? Are you trying to invalidate what I'm saying by being
Right.
critical? Are you trying to, whatever? Like, what's the point of your criticism? Once that's spotted, to me, the fight is really over,
Right.
because I already know what you're doing. I already know you're trying to be manipulative. I already know you're trying to say stuff to coax me to get your way or whatever. So it doesn't really it doesn't really phase me the same way, because
Right.
I can kind of see it from a God's eye view, so to
Yeah, an
speak.
exterior perspective.
Yeah,
Right.
exactly.
And that's something that I mean, o- only since I've known you and I've worked with you outside of the paradigm of Scientology, and
Hmm.
you point things out and everything like that, and well, Cancerians live through their feelings and all this stuff. Uh, I've still always found it's just it seems to me the way that it is for me, being born on the 25th of June. And you said, what was it you said about uh what was it? I was on the borderline, the cusp of what was the one
Yeah,
that comes before
Gemini,
that? What's the
Gemini,
Gemini?
yeah,
So I've got this sort of weird, funky composite Gemini slash Cancerian thing going on where I like to study and I understand things and
very
there's that analytic.
intelligent, very communicative.
Yeah. So there's that analyticalness of it. And it almost is a damnable quality because then I'm looking at, okay, if I got something on this here and it's not just, uh, well, I'll just say it, a Cancerian, full-blooded Cancerian can be reactive, quote unquote,
God,
to
yes.
what whatever it is that they're experiencing, especially when you have the Mercury retrograde thing going on. And
All this stuff.
these I mean this I was totally oblivious to this stuff, and you're pointing it out to me and I'm like, god damn, he's right about this. There's these physical universe external influences that happen. I mean,
And it's
I've seen it time
observable.
and time
It's
and time again since you pointed out. It's observable,
it's
manifest.
observable. And yeah, and I think that not to go off on that tangent, but I want to stick on the topic because what we're talking about here is that things that come up in your experience, um how do I process that, right? And even with over many hours of book one Dianetics auditing myself, and also auditing to up the grades, dealing with all this stuff, um release grade release, and all these different things. When you hit something that somebody tries to lessen you or invalidate you or criticize you, I always look at the source. I'm
Right,
like, wait a minute, who are you again? Like,
yeah,
look at your life. Like,
right,
what are you talking about? And if that person, and this is actually a Qism for me, if that person is somebody who I seek to emulate, or I seek to be like, or I seek to have something that they might have, or whatever case may be, then I might take their criticism as a maybe I need to look at something here. But if it's something who I
yeah,
don't want to be like, if it's somebody who I don't want to emulate, I don't want to have what they got or be like they are, absolutely, I'm not going to take that to heart. Get
right.
out my face, please.
Right. And that's, that's why I was mentioning from your standpoint, from an astrological standpoint,
Right.
it's you're I was I just had a conversation last night where I was saying, well, Quentin Quentin's like, somebody does something and you're like, well, there's the door. Bye. And I'm like, well, hold on, give it another chance. And then it comes round, and then I'm like, shit, I should have just listened to him in the first place. Is that but that's what I'm talking about. Is that
what, what,
criticism
what
or
I
is it
love about
true?
it, right? What I love about it is that when you're able to make a correct estimation, because that's a part of being on the OCA, correct estimation,
Mhm.
right? When
Right.
you're able to make correct estimations about things, when you're able to choose the correct target in an argument, when you're able to say, this is the thing that I don't like, or this is the thing that's problematic, somebody might hear it as a criticism because there's some missed withholds there, right?
Mm-hmm.
But
That's where I was headed.
I,
Yeah.
I could actually be talking about the actual problem in the situation, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And by talking about the actual problem in the situation, that is a correct estimation and a correct target. I'm not
Right.
targeting you. Why, like my whole thing is like, if we're in a relationship, why would I make you the enemy? You sleeping in the bed with me. You
Right.
you 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 bring me dinner. You know what I mean? I'm not finna I'm not finna have no
Right.
glass ground up in my soup, as Ellen Rate says it. I'm not gonna have no poison in my
Yeah.
soup. No, I'm not making you the enemy, but I am looking at these correct estimations. I'm looking at these things and being critical,
Right.
perhaps, or stating truth about what's showing up here that needs
Yeah.
to be corrected, that
Right.
cannot be or should not be, and then
Mhm.
therefore we can move forward if we're both
Right.
operating at that viewpoint, right? If we both can come
Right.
to an understanding of that.
Yeah, and that goes back to the podcast on overthinking and knowing. If you know, then you're certain that you know, and you have, and it sounds uh airy fairy, but if you have a clean heart and you don't have any overage there, you can see objectively, but you also have to be able to look at where the other person's tone level is. How are they going to take this communication? What is their ARC and you, KRC, knowledge, responsibility, control, and power.
Power.
Can and then you default to, it's almost like a flow chart. You go, okay, is this an effect that they can easily have? And I need to be willing to experience anything. And then you go to the definition of responsibility, which is sometimes you do something and other times you don't do anything at all.
Hmm?
I mean, this is something you have to look at. So there's two very different sides to this in what criticism and truth are. If you're doing a correct evaluation that says there are no fire extinguishers in this building and the kitchen is a fire hazard, is that a criticism or is that a truth?
Right. Right.
You know, and we're talking about a building, and somebody who's responsible for that building, who takes care of the grounds and everything, might be like, "Well, how could you say that?" Well, it's true.
Well, and it says here, based on Finn, it says the technical material suggests that true observation based on facts, delivered with helpful intention, differs fundamentally from criticism, which often stems out of other motivations, right? And may not be grounded in fact. And so, if it's observably true and delivered with helpful intention, right? Because that's
Mhm,
a part of communication, right? Intention.
mhm.
Delivered with helpful intention, it might not necessarily be criticism, right? It's not criticism. So, and I'm just going to use this as an example, but if one makes a comment, um, observably so, about someone's weight, right?
Right, right,
It might not be easy to receive, right?
or
But
receivable at all.
or receivable at all. But if it's delivered with a intention to be helpful, I'm concerned about your health. I'm concerned about your heart. I'm concerned about your
Blood pressure.
breathing.
Yeah,
You got sleep apnea or whatever. I'm concerned about this, and you might want to consider, some weights loss or whatever, or just do some exercising together. That won't necessarily could might not necessarily be a criticism, but it could be somebody really, really with the intention of trying to help. And so
right.
I think it just takes somebody being a little bit, being able to come out of their own, uh, oh God, I hate to say it, but coming out of their own protection mechanism, the self
Mech-
defense.
or mechanisms.
Right, right. Those mechanisms that just turn on out of what? Who are you talking to like that? What you talking about? I look good. I don't care what you say. I look good. But I'm not talking about how you look, sweetie.
Right,
I'm talking about how your heart is beating.
right. And you have to, are can you even talk to them about it? And if you
Yeah,
can't talk to them about it, then that goes back to the definition of responsibility: do something or do nothing at all.
right.
And then rules to happy living only cause those effects that others can easily have. But
Mm.
there's two sides of it. If you know that somebody is so defensive about something, whatever it is, whether it's fire hydrants, weight, or whatever,
Car. Yeah.
yeah, it's, a fact is a fact.
Hmm.
And then if you do say it and you get, well, that's your opinion from them, then you know what you're dealing with.
Right.
And so what do? Well, okay, I took responsibility, not knowledge and control, and uh, you you've done what you can do. That's all there is to it. But I mean, when you're looking at it from an organizational standpoint, that's something completely different. Where if the place is going to burn down, if it doesn't have fire extinguishers and there are fire hazards in the kitchen,
Sure.
then whether people get their feelings hurt or not is immaterial and unimportant because it puts everybody at risk. So a fact is
Hmm.
a fact. But it's funny how when it's the third dynamic or above, you can offend a little bit more without fear of retribution because it endangers a group or an organization or the fourth dynamic. I mean, see where this goes. So
Yeah. Well, what LRH says here in what am I reading? This is the Auditor's Code. It's a lecture on the Auditor's Code given November 22nd, 1950. And um, he says, so what you're actually running into, there is the physical pain engram, which is practically all the engram there is. And there are three others which can impinge upon it: the painful emotion engram, the insisted communication engram, and the invalidated reality engram. Okay. And so, of course, if a person, we're talking about, Dianetics auditing, we're talking about auditing, we're talking about getting rid of engrams, we're talking about, case gain and all this stuff. If a person is having a lot of painful emotion, physical pain engrams and painful emotion engrams that can impinge upon it, or insisted communication engrams, this is stuff that, like, mama said, daddy said, mama said that, and it kind of hits you. And it's like, God, and it feels like pain. It feels hurtful. You understand? Because you're hitting on something that this person has had in their experience, some incident that they've had in their experience. And the last one is invalidated reality, totally invalidating somebody's reality. That what's true for them is not being validated. And so these things feel like actual pain because it says that's really all there is to an engram, physical pain. But it says there's three others that can impinge upon it, which is that physical pain engram. Okay, and it says, and they could be all be done forcefully enough so that the person would practically fold up. You know, and so we have to be very mindful when we're communicating and when we're dealing with people in our lives. How do we deliver what may be true to you, right? But it might not be easily received or not received at all because it's hitting on something that you might not be able to be aware of.
right, and it struck me that where this is also at, and this wasn't developed until after 1950. Again, referring back to the last podcast where we talked about the CDEI scale, the know, KNOW, understand, curious, desired, enforced, inhibited, NO, no, and then refused. The bottom of that scale is what you're describing as a refused reality: inhibited, no, and refused. So it refused is
Yeah,
at the bottom. This nope, hand up. This is isn't. It's a not is of the states of
right.
being, axiom 11. And so it's going to be at the bottom of that scale. It's going to be received as a criticism, whereas if it was at the upper end of it, from curious to understand, they're curious about, well, explain to me, not in a defensive way, explain to me why it is you feel that way about that. And you explain it and they understand and they go, well, you're right. Sometimes whatever the thing is, and now they're at understand and they can do something about it. And now they're at know because they know what it is that it didn't seem like a criticism. It was a truth. And now they can do something with it to modify whatever it is that they're doing in their behavior or actions that needs to be resolved. So that's the difference between criticism and truth. Truth is no, criticism is refused. Because when you're
Right.
criticizing, what do you when you're criticizing, you're
You're
refusing.
refusing that situation, that reality, that thing. Yeah, that is. Yeah.
Right. Both parties, both
Mm-hmm.
parties are refusing. Isn't that
Mm-hmm.
interesting?
Mm-hmm.
The originator and the receiver, well, that's criticism. I'm not that way. They're both refusing.
Right.
And so they're both in the same place on the scale. Yeah.
This is
Yeah.
why I always say, when somebody's trying to come at you that way, my this is my way I kind of handle it. I lean into it. I lean into it like I don't come from a place of refusing. So like, you ugly. Somebody say, oh, you ugly. Okay, well, I guess I'm ugly. And okay, got it. I
Well,
I see
you don't
that you
have to look
I,
at me.
I see that you see me as ugly. Right?
Right. Right. Grant them beingness. Okay. They think I'm ugly.
Right.
Okay. I don't have to accept that as a truth if that's true. And that gets to the what's true for you is true for you type of a thing. But as one goes up the tone scale, one
Hmm.
becomes less and less critical, much more the two rules to happy living type of a thing, and they can grant somebody beingness and they can say something about it, or they don't have to say anything at all, to the point to where you see people who as they go up the bridge, they don't criticize nearly as much. They don't
Right.
feel the need to criticize. They just
Right.
observe it for what it is. Okay, that's how that person behaves. I can either be in their orbit or I cannot be in their orbit, and it's their
Hmm.
choice. And they will make the choices of being in certain orbits or not being in certain orbits because they, I don't want to say refuse to be at that tone level. They just accept, because it's not refused on the CDEI scale. It's no.
Hmm. Exactly. And that's exactly the point I'm making. And what's interesting is when yeah, KNOW. Right. When you get to a certain place on the bridge, a certain place on the tone scale, when you kind of at a certain place in your own beingness, uh, you kind of don't even pull in criticism like that.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's
Yeah.
like it's like people have opinions and people go, I mean, everybody got an opinion. Everybody got what they say, everybody got an opinion. But you don't really pull in criticism like that.
Mhm.
And I think that's really fascinating that as you kind of operate at a certain space, you don't get hit as much or that often with it, right? But but if you're operating down at a lower space, you might get hit a little bit more. My spiritual teacher used to tell me, um, he says, eagles fly alone, buzzards hang with the crowd, right? Eagles fly alone, but buzzards hang with the crowd. And so if you're up there flying alone, if you're doing your thing, you're an apex predator, so to speak. It's like you doing your thing. Like who's gonna come for you? But if you a buzzard, if you with all the other buzzards, and they cackling and doing whatever, you might get hit a little bit more often.
Right. And that's another point that it didn't even occur to me to mention is in that type of a situation where you're higher toned individual NOT, um, and what you're saying about you don't receive criticism is because you become unassailable. Why are you unassailable? Let's
Oh,
look at
I
that
love
for
that.
a minute. Why are you unassailable?
Hmm.
Why aren't you pulling in criticism? Because you are living in alignment of your dynamics. You are operating at a point where it is so obvious and manifest and palpable to people, and you've chosen the people in your orbit around you that you deal with, where you don't receive any criticism because I mean, just to dumb it down, you have all your ducks in a row on your dynamics.
Yeah, that's what it
So
is.
yeah, the criticism melts away basically.
Right. Right.
And
You come to a point where as if you are being observed, if somebody is trying to look at you with a critical eye, back in the day, you used to call it the evil eye, the
there you
evil.
all.
Yeah, if they try to look at you with the evil eye, um, it doesn't phase you because no, I'm good. I'm really doing my best to be my best, right? The
Right.
greatest good for the greatest number of dynamics for the greatest period of time. And as an OT from an OT perspective, you become at cause, right? You become
Mhm.
at cause over life, matter, energy, space, time, and thought. You become at cause. And
Mhm.
so that becomes, you don't become the effect of as much.
Yeah. Eh, uh, LRH says, a person should be known by their good works. And then we're not just talking about how many great paintings you've put out or your products, because whether it's your products, the things that you do, that you produce for the exchange of money, goods, services, and all that stuff, that's all good and fine, but it is how you behave and how you treat others, which then brings us back to the two rules to happy living. You're unassailable because you can't be criticized, because your good works, your behavior, your communication cycle, your etiquette, the
Mm-hmm.
way you treat responsibility, the way you give exchange in abundance, and you as a person, Quentin Stroud,
Mm-hmm.
are one of those people,
Thank you. Yes.
you know? And when you put your mind to something, you give it your all, and you're there effusively, just force of nature kind of being. And that's how you
Mm-hmm.
become unassailable across your dynamics. And I like to use the term flowy. There's it's just flowing in and flowing out and contributing to the flow of others in that, you bend like a reed in the wind, and that type of thing. And that's a very OT way to operate. And so you don't receive criticism, you only receive truth, and you see truth for what it is, or you see untruth for what it is. And that's
Mm-hmm.
where LRH says that the definition of OT is power is the ability to hold a position in space.
Yes.
So you have this what do you call it? A composite of criticism and truth, to where there is no criticism, only truth.
Right. Right.
Isn't that wonderful?
It's so funny because I was just on a podcast for living abroad, and we were talking about how people interact. Like, do you feel safe living abroad? Do you feel safe living in other parts of the world, stuff like that? And I said, absolutely, I feel very safe. And I talked about how when I go downstairs, I live in a high rise condo. When I go downstairs and walking amongst the locals, people just speak to me. Oh, hey, hello, boss. Hey, boss. They be, hey, boss. Hey, brother. Because I live in Malaysia, so they call you each other brother. Hey, brother, how you doing, brother? Oh, da, da. And they're talking to me. I don't know these people from Adam. I have no idea who these people are, but they just feel willing to speak, right? And I love that. Well, then one day I was at a restaurant, and I overhear this gentleman speaking over his phone, over FaceTime, and I heard him speaking English. And I said, "Oh, okay, this is another English speaking person." So after he got off the phone, I kind of walked past his table and I said, "Hey, where you from?" Just like that. "Hey,
Mhm.
where you from?" And he didn't respond. And so I said, "Hey," maybe because I thought maybe he had his earbuds in or whatever. I said, "Hey, where you from?" And he goes, "Why are you talking to me?" Like that. "Why are you talking to me?" And I said, "Oh, right." And I guess he thought that was gonna throw me off the scent. I don't know, right? And so I said, "Oh, well, I overheard you speaking English, and so I wanted to kind of know where you were from." And he said, "It doesn't matter." And I said, "Oh, okay. Well, it was really good to meet you. wherever you're from, I'm from the US. It was really good to meet you. And I knew he was from the US. He was a guy from the US. I knew he was. And I said, well, it's really good to meet you. And I and he was like, just leave me alone. He said, just leave me alone. And so I walked away and I sat down. And so the people I was with was like, oh, I can't believe he did that. I can't believe he said that. And why was he talking like that? And I said, he must have just been having a bad day. I don't know what that conversation was that he just got off FaceTime with somebody. His girlfriend might have broke up with him. Now he's single. I don't know what's going on. Right. And
Mhm.
so but it didn't jar me. It didn't phase me. You know,
Mhm.
it was just like, he really wanted to attack. Like it was loud and it was obnoxious and it was uncalled for. But yeah, it didn't hit me like that.
Yeah, it didn't phase you. And that is a prime example of you didn't have any missed withhold to get
That's right.
ARC broken about if and I mean you can quantify it for whatever it is, but to say, I mean, almost to say that it would almost be critical to say that it was rude. Do you get what I'm saying?
Yeah,
He
yeah.
he you could say, well, he was really rude, but in your case, you didn't even go, huh, about it.
Right.
You were just like, okay, that's where he's at, and you go on about your day, and that's it.
And the other thing, right? And the other thing is I originated the communication.
Hmm.
So I am the cause of all this. If I had never spoken to him, he would have never said anything to me and been rude to me or whatever the case may be, right? So I also accepted responsibility, right,
Right.
for originating that communication that led to that rude outburst of whatever that was that he was going through, right? So again, I say, when you one thing I love about auditing is that it allows you to take a look at yourself.
Yeah.
Scientology is one of the true mystery religions in that it allows you to take a look at your mystery or my
Hmm.
story, my journey, my life, who I am, and the unfoldment of that. And so by being in the chair, I can stop and, like, oh shoot, I did do that. Or, oh shoot, that did come up. Oh, I do feel this. I do feel that. And you
Hmm.
can then use this out in the real world. This is not just stuff that when you on the cans and when you sitting, in front of your auditor, that's when it's on. You can
Yeah.
use the auditor's code in the real world. You can
Yeah.
use the stuff that you experience in session out in the real world, and you can see things from a causative viewpoint. I originated that communication. I was the cause of that interaction. And so how can I be mad at him for being mad at me? Like,
Right.
what? This is
Right.
crazy.
And I've got a funny story, and this is I don't know, it's almost like a piece that should be in a museum for me. You walk through it, you go, and this happened, and it was a friend of mine, Mike, and we were out selling uh, three-piece furniture sets on the street corner. I used to be a roadside vendor for 2.5 decades, and it was a hot day in Rochester, Minnesota. Hot, muggy, August. It was, yeah, I think it was in August, like it is now. And and this is what auditing does for a person is you see somebody, Mike gets into it, it's hot out, and he's talking to these people in their car about these furniture sets, and he goes, it's hot out here. Do you mind if I get in your car? He gets in their car, windows, they roll their windows up, and he sits there and he has a conversation with these people selling them a $650 three-piece set of furniture off of this semi truck that we have these furniture sets on. And he sits in there for like 20 minutes, and he had the sale in the first 2 minutes and then had an 18-minute conversation with them about all these other things and got out of the car smiling, didn't say anything about selling it, just had the money in his hand and knew what sets of furniture that they wanted, sold two sets, and we pulled them out of the truck and everything, and they organized later on to come and pick it up and everything. And it was one of those things where you're like, I could never do that?
Right.
Are you out of your mind? You got in their car, in their personal space. You're sitting there slapping them on the shoulder. They're looking at you in the rear view mirror. How awkward is that? You don't know these people and you're talking to them like you've known them for 20 years. I mean,
Right.
and you just go, you're a god. I mean, I can sell anything to anybody, but I mean, to me, that's just
That's a whole
audacious.
other level. Right.
That's a whole nother level. And he just looks at me, and it was the funniest thing because he's this big, tall guy, bigger than me, and I'm a big guy, and he just looks at me and says one word, oddity.
Wow.
Yeah, and I'm like, oh man. And he's a trained class four auditor as well. And so was I, but I just looked at that and that was like, I could
That's it.
never do that.
There you go.
How I
There you
you
go.
just you look and I just was like, this guy's got this OT ability where he just includes people in his because he used to sell the Ginsu knives at the home shows and stuff like that in
Mhm.
these convention halls. And he dealt with so many people. He knew the communication formula. He understood that he could talk to anybody, anywhere, anytime, anyhow, with anything. That's
Anything.
grade zero.
That's right.
I mean,
That's right.
holy cow. So, I mean, these types of things where you just like, you're the client whisperer type of a thing. And he just look, I'll never forget it. And it wasn't smugly or anything. He just blithely said it and said, auditing.
Honestly, that's it.
So you can have
I'm
these
telling you.
abilities too.
Yeah, and that's so real for me. That's so real for me that the stuff that we do in session, when I come out of session and I'm so keyed out and I'm just so beaming, exterior, having a really, really great day, and I go outside and I connect with people and they feel it and they see it and they know it to be true. And if they don't, they are operating at a whole different frequency. So either A, I don't experience them at all, or B, when I do experience some, I'm able to quickly leave it behind because it has nothing to do with me at all.
Right.
You
Right.
know,
That's truth.
that's truth. That's truth, man. And so I totally see how anybody who is using this stuff, who is using this tech, who is getting in session, who is doing the work to better themselves, is also bettering themselves across all their dynamics. Everywhere you go, every sphere of influence that you occupy, everything that you're touching, everything I touch turns to gold. You gotta believe that. You gotta know that, but you gotta get there. And you gotta feel that way and know that to be your truth as a being.
Right.
And that's how this whole thing works. And I absolutely love it.
Right. And just as a little tagline, the fine print at that is you can have or you cannot have. You don't have to must have. The guy could have risen to your level and said, "Oh, I'm from Connecticut," or whatever. But he didn't. He was at refused on the CDI scale, and you're totally fine with it. And he was taking it as some sort of wonky evaluation, probably
Right.
in his universe, and you just spotted it as truth as okay, this guy can't have this thing and isn't willing to experience anything. Okay, fine.
Yeah.
You go sit down and people are like, he's so rude. And you're just like,
Yeah.
what?
I
It's
mean,
it's
it's,
fine. It's fine. And
it's
and
his
so
prerogative.
that's the difference between criticism and truth. No, not no. Refused and no is that is
And the,
one person receives as criticism, the other person is completely coming from a point of truth and recognizing it and being responsible for what it is that you say, what effect it has, looking at yourself and monitoring yourself and going, did I take that personally? Okay, I probably got a withhold, which means I was ARC broken, which means I've got something I need to handle in session or write up as
mhm.
an overt and withhold. And then all of a sudden you find yourself looking at things from a completely different perspective. So both one is auditing and one is training.
There you go. And I always say rejection is always protection.
Hmm.
So if you don't want to talk to me, if you don't like me, if you think I'm ugly, you know, whatever, rejection is always protection.
Right.
So
A
I feel
blocking
so
is a
good.
blessing.
A blocking is a blessing. A blocking is a blessing. Okay. And so if I need to block you or you need to block me, I'm blessed either way.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
So I feel good about it. And I think that this is exactly how I want each of you listeners. I want you to know that there's times when these things are going to show up in our experience. This is just life, right? There's times when you may feel criticized, there's times when you may feel attacked, or there's times when people may come for you or whatever. Be at a place where, okay, that's the
Have,
answer.
not have, just okay.
Okay.
But it is what it is. And
Serenity
that's
of beingness.
right. And that is the ultimate as isness right there, is being able to recognize something for what it is in its source, and you just go on with your life, and you don't take it personal, and cause only those effects that others can easily have, and be willing to experience anything, which is exactly what you did in that moment.
Yep. There you go.
So I hope our listeners grok have a conceptual understanding of this concept. It, at first blush, it is not something that looks like it's as deep as we've gotten into it, but given these concepts, you can use these concepts and get something from it through training on the College of Independent Scientology.com, on our online course room, or you can get auditing and get the benefits of auditing on both sides of these flows, so that you can have anything, no matter what it is, whether it's criticism or truth, and you will recognize truth and be a lot better off for it. So for Quentin and myself, Arthur wasn't able to get in. We're still working on this with his new phone and Wi-Fi and everything. We'll get it straightened out for our next podcast next week and have Arthur on the show as well. Have a great week or weekend, depending on when you're listening to this podcast. And please get in touch with us at ao-gp.org for our specials this month. We'll fill you in on those as we're running out of time. Namaste, and we love you. Bye bye.
Peace.